Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a minute. Please feel free to drop a little note in the chat and just share where you're joining us from this morning. Say hello. And give this about another 30 seconds to a minute. As I mentioned, please feel free to just drop a note in the chat, say hi. You can share where you are this morning or this afternoon or this evening, as the case may be. Hi, Micah. Okay, I think I'm going to give it until 10:01 and then we'll go ahead and jump in. Hi. Okay, we are expecting a few more people, but hopefully they will trickle in. I want to go ahead and get started. So, sorry about this. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Allison Lewis. I'm an objects conservator and a conservation liaison here with Conserv. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California, where I've been working in local museums and with other collections here for about the past 15 years at this point. I joined Conserv in January of 2022, and my background is in archaeological conservation, which remains one of my special interests, along with care of natural history collections and integrated pest management. My colleague, Melissa King, our now Director of Customer Success, I'm realizing this slide is a little bit out of date, and Preventive Conservator sometimes joins us for these webinars. But since we're going to be a fairly small group today, we will just be flying solo. So we are going to show you the software today as if you were opening it up for the very first time and go through all of the steps in getting your account set up. We'll start by going over the climate-related tools, and then we'll wrap up by going through the integrated pest management, the IPM tools. And we'll walk through all of the steps of getting your spaces set up. And we will, of course, take a look at some of the analytics and reports. After the webinar, I'll send out a recording link for your reference and in case anyone couldn't make it. And that email will also include some information about how to talk to us if you're curious about our data loggers. Of course, I'm happy to answer questions about those today too. And let's start by watching a short video that just summarizes what we're all about at Conserv.
We know that environmental monitoring is essential to preserving your collection, but it's also a big hassle. Manual data collection, software that looks like the 1990s, and customer support that's, well, unsupported. The truth is, these old data logger companies just aren't built for today's preservation work. Meet Conserv, a modern wireless monitoring solution built specifically for collections that transforms hassle into delight. Turn on your accurate wireless Conserv sensors and they just work. No more manual data collection. Log into your Conserv software and get environment and pest insights to support your team's decision-making from anywhere. And experience the incredible customer support delivered by our team of conservators. With a Conserv subscription, you're joining a growing group of museums, libraries, and archives that expect more. Conserv is what preservation professionals want. We know because we asked. To get started, visit www.conserv.io.
Okay, so as we just saw, Conserv's revenue comes from the sales of our wireless data loggers, but part of the company's mission is to make great preservation tools that are accessible to anybody, anywhere, regardless of budget, geography, things like that. So we also offer a free version of our software, which you now have access to. You or potentially someone on your team should have received an invite to an account from a team@conserv.io email. So please check your spam folder and let us know if you didn't see that. Unfortunately, sometimes these emails do get filtered to spam. And if someone at your workplace already has an account that you would like to share, they can invite you into it. And we'll go over how to do that in a few minutes. I believe that at least one person who registered for today's webinar also received an account a while ago when they signed up for one of our IPM webinars. So if that's you and you never accessed your account and need help logging in, you can let me know afterwards and we'll be happy to get that sorted out for you. So the software that you now have access to is free forever. It lets you invite as many people as you want into your account and upload as much data as you would like into your account. You can use the software with any other type of data logger or even building management system in addition to Conserv's loggers. Anything that outputs data in a CSV file can be uploaded into our software. As I mentioned, the software has tools for both environmental monitoring and IPM or pest management. And as we'll see in a few minutes, the software lets you do a lot of cool things like specify certain parameters or what we call levels for each space, generate preservation metrics, which can give you real insight into what's happening in your spaces, record observations to contextualize your data and have those living right there with your data. You can view local weather readings, and you can also create reports easily. And we have some templates in there, like an AAM facilities report. This is very informal today, so please feel free to drop questions in the chat or the Q&A box whenever. I'll be stopping periodically to check in for questions. And we are definitely a small group, so we should have plenty of time for that. Just so you know, we are recording this session, but this is just for your benefit and for people who signed up but couldn't make it in person. We will not be sharing the recording widely or anything like that. So please don't feel hesitant about asking questions. And before we really dive in, I would love to just get a sense if you guys know of how you think you're planning to use the software. So feel free to drop another note in the chat and let me know if you think you're going to mainly be using it for environmental monitoring or IPM or all of the above, or if you're not sure at all, which is fine, you're in the right place. And then finally, I want to make sure to let you know about a few resources that we have fairly recently put together for the preservation community. And the first is our own Conserv online community, which is a really, I have found to be great online forum type space. It's very friendly, very supportive, and it's designed to be a spot where anyone doing preventive conservation can gather and ask questions and exchange ideas. And we've had some really great conversations going on in there. We do monthly AMA, Ask Me Anything style sessions, bringing in, people with expertise in a certain area. So we just did one with Sarah Sutton on sustainability and climate change. Before that, we did one with a facilities manager. We had lots of great tips for communicating with building engineers and, understanding the way they approach some of these issues. Okay, great. Okay, getting started with IPM, environmental monitoring. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Okay, and so in addition to the community, we also have a monthly newsletter, which is a curated roundup of interesting and hopefully useful preservation-related events, articles, and other educational resources. And I will include links to both of these things in the follow-up email after the webinar. So let's go ahead now and actually look at the software. So first things first, let's see. To log into the software, there's a little mention of the community right there. All you need to do is to go to the website or sign in on the mobile application on your phone. Just open up any type of browser, go to the website, which is conserv.io. And then there's this login button at the top right of the screen. And you can click this here to log in. The first time you log in, I apologize, it's playing around a little bit before we got started. The first time you log in, you're going to be prompted for some information here in the settings menu, just some basic contact information. And this is also where you can make your selections about units of measurement. So you can see for temperature, you can select Fahrenheit or Celsius. For distance, feet or meters. And for illuminance, you can select lux or foot candles. I'm in California, I'm in the United States. These are the units that I'm used to working with, all three of them actually. So I'm going to stick with these, but you can certainly customize this and look at your information in whichever units you choose. The settings area is also where you can invite team members. Like I mentioned, you can invite an unlimited number of colleagues to collaborate in the software with you. Here you can see I've invited myself in several different capacities into this demonstration account. But all you need to do to invite team members is to go to this invite members button and then enter their emails. And then in this area here, you'll be able to see the status of the invitations that you have sent out. So this is what you'll see the first time you log in. After that, when you log in, you will usually land here in the Sensors tab in the card view, which is what we're looking at right now. This will display all of the sensors in your system laid out card style like this, where you can see the most recent readings for temperature, relative humidity, and dew point, as well as how recently the last update was. Now, each account comes preloaded with a single sensor, in this case, located in our office in New Jersey. And this is so that you have a couple years worth of data to play around with before you add your own. You can definitely delete this sensor. This is not something that you need to, to keep in your system, but we just want to make sure that everybody has a little bit of dummy data to play with. So as you're getting your account set up, one of the first things you're going to want to do is to go over to the hierarchy view, still here in the Sensors tab, and get your own hierarchy of spaces set up. The hierarchy view is where we organize the spatial data and like organize the sort of geography of whatever spaces we're monitoring, both for the environmental monitoring and for pest management if you're using the software for that. And we have three categories in the hierarchy tab that you can see here. We have buildings, or we refer to them as locations. Usually a location is going to correspond to a building. In this case, the Conserv office building in New Jersey that we were just looking at the card sensor for. And then within locations or buildings, we have spaces, which will typically correspond to a room. Most of the time, there are some exceptions, which I'll go over in a minute. And then at the most sort of like granular level of the hierarchy, we have individual sensors. So when you're getting your account up and running, one of the first things that you're going to want to do is to go ahead and set up a hierarchy that reflects the geography of whatever buildings and spaces that you are monitoring. And so in order to do that, you go down to this turquoise button at the lower left. And then we'll start by adding a location. So I'll click add a location. And let's do some environmental monitoring at the White House today. Now this pulled up a drawer with lots of fields. There's a lot of information, most of it optional that you can add here. You do need to give your location a name. You can describe it. You can add things like elevation, ASHRAE classification. There's information about floors and HVAC zones. One thing that you do need to enter is the address. So we'll do that here. In learning, there are a lot of Pennsylvania avenues, as it turns out. And this is because our software pulls weather data from a local weather station. So it needs an address to do that function. If you have security concerns and you don't want to enter like the exact real address of like, say, a storage facility building or something like that, totally fine. Just pick an address that's nearby that will ensure that you're getting accurate weather data. So then I've entered, the mandatory information here. I could add an image if I want. When I've entered all the information I want to, I just go ahead and save changes. And we've now created our first location. You do something very similar in order to create a space within the location. We'll go ahead, go down to that turquoise button, click add a space, which will bring up a similar set of fields. So let's go ahead and see what's happening climate-wise in the Oval Office. We need to specify which location that is in. So it's definitely not in the Conserv office building. I'll select the White House here. Again, there's a lot of optional information that you can add. You can add a description. I do want to draw your attention to the size field right here. Especially if you're planning on using the IPM tools in the software, it's really crucial, or at least important, to add the size or the estimated size of each room or space right here. I still don't know exactly how big the Oval Office is. We'll say it's 500 square feet for our purposes today. And then again, you can add an image if so, and then you can save changes. The reason we ask you to add the square footage or the square meters of the space is because one of our pest-related metrics, the pest occurrence index, is a formula that creates an index number. And the whole idea is that it seeks to normalize observations of pest activity in disparate spaces and account for factors that might skew your pest data. And since it's literally a formula that needs the room size, the software won't be able to generate that metric if you don't input the size of the space in that field. One other thing about spaces, if you're going to be deploying a logger or otherwise, monitoring a space within a space, like a conditioned cabinet or a display case or something like that, even though it's technically another layer down in that sort of like nested Russian doll of spaces, we suggest that you go ahead and make it its own space like this, because that will just work better with our levels tool, which is the next thing that I'm going to show you. But let's just go ahead, and I assume there is probably something pretty cool on display in the Oval Office. So I'm going to create another space to represent a display case there. It's probably very small. And then save changes. And now I have a building or location and several spaces within it. And this is a drag and drop menu, so you can move spaces around between buildings and things like that. Are there any questions about the hierarchy and how we use this to, again, set up the geography of the spaces that you're going to be working with? No questions? Okay, well, let's go ahead and take a look at levels next. Levels are how we can set up like guideposts or desired parameters that we'd like to achieve in each space. You can find levels down here under setup by this little gear icon at the lower left. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and then you can see right here we are in levels and looking at some level settings. And right now all of these spaces are set to this default level. And looking at this, let's drill down a little bit. We can see that this level is telling us that what we would like to achieve in these spaces are a temperature between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So here's the minimum, here's the maximum, with a target average temperature of 70 degrees there in the middle. And then the number in parentheses here refers to the daily fluctuation sort of cap that we would like to see. So for this level, the default level, we're saying that we do not want to see more than a 5-degree, in this case Fahrenheit, temperature fluctuation per 24-hour period. Similarly, for relative humidity, we're aiming for a target RH of 50%. With a minimum of 40% and a maximum of 60%, and a maximum daily fluctuation of 10 percentage points. So no more than a 10% swing per day. The levels also include targets for illuminance. So in this case, we're aiming for light levels of 50 lux and a maximum of 100, so not to exceed 100. And then there's also a field for hours of illumination. So for this particular level, we're telling the software that we do not want to see the lights on in this space for more than 16 out of each 24 hours. So again, all accounts come preloaded with a set of suggested levels, and these are a really great starting point, especially if you're just beginning to do environmental monitoring or if you're in a new space that you don't know that well, as you accumulate data and get to know your building and how it functions, or if you have like very specific parameters for a certain storage space, say like a dry metals cabinet or something, you'll likely want to create your own customized levels, which you can do. So to create your own level profile, you can go to New Level over here. And then this will bring up the menu of preloaded options that you have, which you can see include like sustainable control, so kind of like a wider range, tight control, cool and cold storage, and default. We'll go ahead and select one of these, and then this will bring up a somewhat familiar looking drawer where we can customize the level, beginning by giving it a new name. So let's go ahead, let's make a seasonal level for the White House. Seasonal levels are something that can be really useful since conditions do tend to shift and drift in a somewhat predictable pattern with the seasons. So let's say for temperature, it might be a little bit warmer in the summer. Let's bump that up a little and assume that our target is going to be a bit warmer as well. And it might be a bit more humid as well. Let's say we don't want to get too humid here, but we'll adjust that. I don't think I'm going to change the illuminance settings for a seasonal level, and I'll stick with that 16 hours of illumination per day. So I'll go ahead and save all changes. And now you can see that we've created a new level that we can drag and drop things into that reflects our sort of expected and or aspirational conditions for the White House in summer. Again, if you've never created levels for your space, it might take some time of collecting data to really get a sense of what your space is capable of. And this is going to be highly dependent on things like where in the world your building is located, again, what season you're in, what your building's HVAC system is actually capable of when it comes to controlling the environment. So you can always start with these default levels. And this will all make a bit more sense when we go to the Analyze section. While we are here in this setup area, I want to really quickly preview events and alerts for you. This is something that really applies more if you're using our sensors, but it is a great function. So I'm just going to hop over here to events. And if you were using our sensors, this is where you could set up an alert and a notification system so that you could get an email and or text message anytime conditions went out of spec in whatever way you define in a certain space. So I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but here you can see an example. I've set up an extreme relative humidity alert for the White House that we're looking at today. And I have told the software that I would like to be alerted if the relative humidity goes below 20% or above 80%. And then you can also customize your alerts. So along the lines of how long conditions are, out of spec before you're notified, and how long they should be back in range before the event ends. You can subscribe multiple people to receive these event-based alerts, which is great so that, if you're out of town, and something goes off, you can have backup people to receive alerts and potentially deal with an issue if something has come up. So that's a quick preview of the events and alerts function. I'm now going to head over to the Analyze tab, but before we head out, are there any questions about levels or events and alerts? Okay, well, we can look at levels a little bit more, moving down the purple column here into the Analyze tab. And this is kind of like a powerhouse portion of the software where you can slice and dice your data, you can visualize it, you can view some metrics, and really understand it in whatever, with whatever tools make sense for you. So right now, we are looking at a temperature reading from one sensor, from that good old sensor in the Conserv office in New Jersey. And remember, we were just looking at levels. Here in the Analyze tab, we can see the levels visualized on a graph, which is a nice kind of like quick visual reference to see like how well you are or maybe aren't achieving the levels that you're aspiring to in your space. So for temperature, again, we said we wanted a range of 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And so this green band on the graph here shows that level. And we can see that weren't doing spectacularly well maintaining those conditions in the Conserv office in New Jersey, which I will clarify is not a collection storage space in any way, shape, or form. It is just an office building. And then down here at the bottom of the page, you can see another visualization of our level in the form of this stacked bar graph, which relates to temperature, in this case, fluctuations that the software has registered. So we said we were putting a cap on 9 degrees Fahrenheit fluctuations per 24-hour period. And it turns out we can see quickly here that we were actually under that number for the last 30 days, which is the time period that we're looking at. There's another way to think about the levels here in the Analyze tab. I'm going to move over here to all these circles. On the right-hand side of the screen, these are what we call KPIs or key performance indicators, a term borrowed from the business world. And these are preservation metrics that can give you a quick, like at a glance understanding of how your space is doing, you know, and can complement things like the good old XY axis plot. And the top cluster of these relate very directly to the levels that we were just looking at. So these two circles here in dark blue correspond to the temperature level settings. And the percentages in these circles tell us what % of the time the space was achieving or meeting the targets set forth in the level. So again, with our level, we told the software that we wanted to see the temperature in the Conserv office staying between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. This 9% tells us that that was only happening 9% of the time over the past month, which is borne out, you know, by the graph. We can see that, you know, there was a short time here when we were within the green band. The rest of the time, not so much. The second KPI related to temperature deals with fluctuations. We did a lot better when it came to fluctuations. We were actually staying under 9 degrees, you know, a 9-degree change per 24-hour period, 100% of the time. And then we have similar KPIs for relative humidity right here. So we can quickly see that over the last month, we were meeting our relative humidity, like target range in that space, 35% of the time. In this case, it was between 40 and 60%. And we were meeting our fluctuation targets of 10% or less than 10% per day, 81% of the time. And then similarly for light, we said we didn't want the illuminance to be above 100 lux in this space over the past 30 days, which was not 85% of the time. We didn't do so well on the hours of illumination. We did not want the space to be illuminated for more than 16 hours a day. And we only actually achieved that 3% of the time. So I think the lights are on overnight in the Conserv office or something like that. I've never been there in person, so can't verify. We also have a couple of other KPIs that can be useful. Staying with light, we have a total light exposure calculator. So this calculates the lux hours detected by the sensor in a given time frame. And then we also have a mold risk indicator that looks at relative humidity and temperature and will give you an indication if the software is seeing conditions that are conducive to mold growth. And it'll, you know, flag things as, you know, none, low, medium, or high. So we actually have virtually no mold risk, you know, as determined or estimated by the software in the Conserv office over the last month. But this can be really useful, you know, just as a sort of canary in the coal mine to prompt you to go physically look in a space and check things out. Obviously, this is just a model, and mold growth is a complex phenomenon that takes into account things that, you know, we can't incorporate into the software, like the history of mold outbreaks in that area, the ventilation, you know, the cleaning protocols in there. But it is a really useful, quick check or reminder, especially if you know that mold is a concern in a certain area. You can keep an eye on this and be reminded to go do like a physical visual inspection if you see like especially a high mold risk pop up here. And then finally, we have 2 more KPIs, which again are sort of like models or estimates. This one here, the damage rate, is an estimate of how fast materials stored in that space could be expected to deteriorate relative to if you were meeting your temperature and relative humidity levels. So in this case, as we can see up here, and just from looking at the graph, we were not meeting those levels like significant amounts of time. So the damage estimate KPI here is telling us that we could expect objects in that space to be deteriorating 1.83 times faster than they would if we were meeting those levels. And again, this is just an estimate. This is based on the Image Permanence Institute's work with cellulose acetate collections. So it's not able to take into account the diversity of materials that you might have in a collection or the individual life histories of those objects. But it can be a really useful like communication tool. And you can take this to colleagues and say like, hey, look, like we could be doing a lot better, or hey, we're doing great. And then along those lines, the final KPI is the Conserv score, which is just like a letter grade A, B, C, D style score that is calculated based off of the fluctuations in temperature and relative humidity that the software has registered for the preceding period of time. And again, something like the ABCD, this is something that can be a little bit more like understandable and digestible to people who don't want to like parse lines on a graph. So those are the KPIs. If you're curious about learning more about them and how exactly they're calculated, you can go up to the settings menu here, navigate to resources, and then check out the knowledge base, which is an extensive set of articles that touch upon everything related to both our hardware and our software. And there's a whole section right here on preservation metrics, which will drill down into the details of exactly how those things are calculated and what the thinking was behind them. So I'm going to go back into the Analyze tab here and just talk about a couple of the other tools. Over on the left side here is where you can really customize your data view. So right now we're looking at a single reading temperature from a single sensor. You can compare readings. So for, let's say, like temperature and relative humidity from a single sensor, and you can compare readings from multiple sensors. We are simulating, opening up an account for the first time today. So we just have the one sensor in there. So we can't actually do that, but these are all options for how you want to view your data. And then moving down here, you can also specify what window of time you would like to look at. So you can look at month, week, a year, or like all time. This setting here is quite important. This is the aggregation setting, which lets you decide how granular a view you want to see of your data. Right now, you might notice that this line for temperature is very smooth. That's because we're looking at a daily aggregation. So we're just looking at the average temperature reading for each day plotted out in a line. You can get a lot more granular. You can look at hourly, 15-minute, or no aggregation at all. I find the 15-minute to be pretty useful. You can see like all of the sort of individual peaks and valleys that are of interest to you. If you're looking at large data sets, you might want to stick with the daily, and that will probably load faster in the software. And then you can customize the exact start dates and end dates for which data you want to view. And then I'm going to go back into the daily aggregation as I show you a couple of additional things that you can see down here. So you can see we're showing levels, we're showing the fluctuations. You can also do things like show the weather. So that dotted line there. allows you to compare interior and exterior conditions, which can be really useful for getting a sense of how your building envelope is functioning, or if there's some exterior event that is impacting your data. You can also you can do things like show the weekends. So here, these grayed out bars are Saturdays and Sundays, which again can help you recognize patterns related to like foot traffic in the space, doors being open and shut, things like that. If this all gets to be a little bit much, you can go up to this hide addition button up here and click that to get rid of the chart gunk, and then you'll just have a much cleaner view. If for some reason as sometimes happens, your data is literally like off the charts, you can click auto scale down here to make it a little bit easier to look at. And then I definitely want to make sure to show you guys the observation tool. One of the things I really like about this software is that you can basically annotate this data, and then those notes, what we call observations, will stay with the data and be available to you every time you pull it up. So all of these little dots on this timeline down here are observations that we've made in the past. And let's say, there's something sort of interesting happening in the data. You see the temperature really like dipping right here. You can go ahead and directly make an observation on the data by right-clicking or control-clicking if you're using a Mac like I am today. And then this pulls up a little menu with an eye icon. You can add an observation. Let's say the window was left open in the office or something like that. Give it a name, describe it, note the scope, which is going to be sensor because we're looking at sensor data. You could add an image if you wanted to, and then you save changes, and now you've created that observation. You can also create observations on a larger scale here on the left-hand side in the Observe tab. So let me take a little detour there. Here's a list of observations that we've made. And let's say you want to make an observation about something that's happening in the whole building or a whole large room. You can do that as well here in this tab. Let's say there was a gala dinner at the White House. Your notes can be a little more detailed than mine. You want to give it a name, and then you'll have to specify the scope. So let's say that was impacting the entire building. So I'll pick the location. You can add an image, which would be really helpful for something like a leak. This is a great way to track things like leaks, things like that. And then I didn't select the location. Then you go ahead and save changes. And now this is added to my list of observations. So I'm going to go back into the Analyze tab. And there's just a few more things to show you. This one's really meaty. Up here, this little button for Share Graph is a useful way to generate a link that you can email to a colleague, such that when they click on the link, it will take them directly into this view that you're looking at right now. So you can discuss, this dip in the temperature or whatever it is that you want to have a conversation about. I should also mention you can click and drag to zoom in on a part of the graph, and then you could even share like a zoomed in view like that. Just click escape to get out of that view. You can also save views of your data. Let's say, you really like looking at temperature and relative humidity together. Well, let me actually bring that up. It's a pretty common one. So I'm going to compare readings. We're already looking at temperature. I'm going to add relative humidity. We'll see these together here. I think I'm going to go ahead and auto scale that. Okay, great. If I want to save this view, I can do that here. And then every time I pull up this menu, my saved view will appear. So you can recreate that. Go ahead and get rid of the RH for now. You can also create a couple of reports right here in the Analyze tab. These reports are going to deal with, again, the data set that you are looking at. And so to create the report, you have options to display a summary of the data, the graphs, the KPIs, and the observations. Let's say I just want to see the graph and the KPIs. I make my selections, then I create report, and that will create a PDF with the information that I selected that you could then download right here and share, or do whatever you will with. And then finally, if you want to download your data, if you want to export it for whatever reason, you can of course do that. And you just click the download CSV button, again, making sure that the date is selected, in a way that reflects what you want to download, etc. And then this will create a CSV file of your environmental data that you can use elsewhere. So that is the Analyze tab. I know that's a lot. Are there any questions? Does it look like it? Like I said, there's a lot you can do in there, so feel free to mull that over a little bit. And if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm going to really quickly show you a couple of additional reports here in the Reports tab. These are like kind of higher level reports for like multiple spaces or whole buildings. Here you can create a performance report that will roll up KPIs for your spaces into one report. And then this one, the AAM facilities report, very popular with some of our registrar users. This will crunch the numbers for you. Can quickly for this will match the template of the AAM facilities report so that you don't have to do all of these calculations. The software will do it for you, and then you can use this in your loan documentation if you want to borrow material, etc. It's taking a minute, but this will generate a PDF as well. Doesn't usually take this long. There we go. And voila, we have a facilities report with all of these seasonal numbers. All right, let's look quickly at how to import data from other sensors. As I mentioned, you can import data from any sensor or system that will generate a CSV file and look at that data the way we were just looking at information in the Analyze tab. To do that, you go down to the import button right here and then click on the little blue button. And this will pull up some options for different workflows that we've set up to correspond to some common other brands of loggers. So we have one for hobos, we have one for PEMs, but this other third option is a sort of catch-all that you can use with any other type of logger. And I'm not going to go through the whole process, but basically you make your selection and then you drag your file into this box here. And then the software will take you through a sort of mapping or confirmation process where it will look at like column headings and say, this looks like the date column. Can you confirm? You say yes. You go through that for all of the different categories, and then it imports the data. If you're using the premium version of the software, which comes, of course, with our sensors, you can batch upload. With the basic version, it's going to have to be one by one. So that is the import. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this since we're not actually doing it. And speaking of importing, I'm going to go back to the knowledge base found up here under resources. We have a whole set of articles all about importing data from other types of sensors. And so this has some really detailed information pertaining to individual brands and models. So if you're going to be importing data, this is a great place to start. All right, I want to make sure that we have time to talk about bugs, about pests. Are there any questions before we switch gears a little bit and look at IPM? Any questions about importing data or any of those reports? No, we're in good shape. Okay. All right, so to use the IPM tools, I just went here. I found the little pest icon and moved into the pest tabs. And here you're going to see a familiar looking hierarchy, right? Now, it may be the case, I think it frequently is the case, that you are monitoring pest activity in a larger number of spaces than you are deploying data loggers to measure environmental conditions. So if that is true for you and you're going to be using the IPM tools, one of the first steps that you'll want to take is to go ahead and to really flesh out your hierarchy of spaces, which you can do here using the same process that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. So you can add whole additional locations. If you're dealing with multiple buildings, you can add spaces. And then the third step for setting up your hierarchy for IPM is to add individual pest monitors or traps. Use the term monitor, it's just a decision the company has made. When I say that, I'm talking about traps. And you do that by finding that turquoise button at lower left and then clicking the Add a Pest Monitor icon, which will bring up a drawer with a set of fields related to your traps. So first thing we're going to want to do is give it a name. Let's stick with the Oval Office. Number 1. We'll tell the software what space it's in. It's in the Oval Office itself. We'll also tell the software what type of monitor or trap it is. Let's just say I'm deploying a pretty standard sticky trap or blender trap. So I'll pick that one here. If you're using something else, you could just type it in, like if you're using like a snap trap for rodents or something like that. You're probably definitely going to want to make at least a short note about where it's placed, especially if you're working with multiple people on pest inspections. It's just really helpful, I find, to like document these as thoroughly as possible. So let's say that's on a shelf in the northwest corner. And then here you can add an image, which again, I definitely recommend. So useful, especially if multiple people are going to be looking at these over time. So I'm going to select my image, fit in there, and then save all changes. So now I have entered my first pest trap or pest monitor. So as you're getting your account set up, you're going to want to go through that process for all of your monitors, which admittedly, if you're dealing with a lot of traps, that can take a while, but you only have to do it once. And then when you're ready, let's say your pest monitors have been out for, a month or 6 weeks, whatever interval you're using between your pest inspections. When it's time to check them, you will move on to the 2-step process for recording findings in the trap. This is a 2-step process right now and begins with making an observation, which you can do on the mobile app. So you can be out and around, like walking through your spaces and making observations just with a phone or a tablet. And then the second step is to do the identification. So you'll pull up the observations that you made and go ahead and attempt to identify what it is that you're seeing in that trap. So let's do an observation and identification. Go into, yes, it's time to create one. The Observe tab here and click the blue button. To create an observation, there is a shortcut too. You see this little eye icon. You can create your observation right here. It's going to ask you the scope because you can make observations for whole spaces, whole rooms as well. Because let's be honest, insects and other pests don't stay exclusively on the surfaces of the traps that we put out. So it's important to be able to record their activity in the space at large. But in this case, let's go ahead and create a trap observation. So we'll confirm that the scope is pest monitor rather than space. In this case, we are going to record an observation for that Oval Office one. The date is auto-filled, and then you can take some notes as you're making the observation. Say there's some moths on here, beetle shed. And then these can be helpful as you're going back and trying to identify the critters. And then it's really helpful to upload a photograph. So I'm going to go ahead and add a picture of a trap and then save changes. And then we will use that photograph when we move on to the identification stage. So here I'm moving over to identify. And there is my photo coming up right there. And you can zoom in and scroll around and really, use that photograph to help you remember what it was that you saw. And now Conserv is really excited to have partnered with the Museum Pests working group, and we've incorporated their fantastic database directly into the software. So in order to identify the pests in our trap, we're going to go ahead and be able to pull up that database right here and look at their fantastic images and facts that they've compiled. And if anyone has not checked out museumpest.net, it's like my absolute favorite IPM, certainly, maybe preventive conservation in general, internet resource. This is maintained by a group of collections care professionals and entomologists with extensive experience working with cultural heritage collections. And they have information about all aspects of IPM and cultural heritage collections. They have this fantastic ID database, and then they also have all sorts of literature about, different types of treatments and getting an IPM program implemented. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. But back to the task at hand. So we want to identify the insects on our trap. So I've pulled up this database, and now I can search. You can search by scientific name or common name. You can misspell things like beetle, we'll still bring up BEETLE beetles. And then I feel pretty confident that, we know we have a moth issue, and those look a lot like webbing clothes moths to me. So I'm going to type that in, and then that will bring up moth-related entries. Oh, there, that one, the webbing clothes moth looks like a pretty good match. I can also filter by life cycle stage. These are clearly adults, so I'm going to go ahead and note that. And then I can scroll through images and just, try to confirm my suspicion. That looks like a really good match for what I'm seeing on my trap. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. And yeah, just double checking the pictures. Yes, I feel confident that that's what I'm looking at. And I can also see that we have more than one of these. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 moths there. So I'll go ahead and update the number right here. And then that's the basic process for identifying the insects on a trap. If I were doing this, for real, I would go through the same process, and I would take a look. It looks like there's some sort of small beetle here. It looks like a couple of probably springtails or something like that. But I could zoom in on these, pull up that database of images, and attempt some identifications. And then when you're all done, you hit finish and you have completed your ID. Now, similarly to the environmental data metrics, the IPM tools also have some metrics that you can look at. This is not a very full account. This is not like a rich data set with the pest activity, but we can still preview some of the pest analytics. Here is that POI, or pest occurrence index, that I mentioned. Again, this is a normalization number that allows you to compare pest activity in different spaces. This is based on work done by Jane Henderson and Christian Bars in the UK, who've written fairly extensively about it. So if you want to read more about the POI, just Google them and POI, and you can find some of their papers. The POI will take into account things like different numbers of traps in different spaces of different sizes, and try to de-skew the pest data. So let's say you have a small kitchenette and a large warehouse space, with similar numbers of traps, and you're seeing similar overall pest counts in those spaces. It may be the tiny kitchenette that really merits your attention, even though the raw numbers for the two spaces are the same. Those are the types of questions the POI can help you answer. And then there's also a pest count by time and pest count by type. and pest count by space field here in the analytics tab. Again, here you can see we just said that we found 7 living clothes moths. I could show you over in these slides. We have here's a slightly more interesting pest data set. So you can see this pest occurrence index by space and by time. Oops. Like so. Okay, so back into the software we go. We have just a few minutes left. I want to make sure to show you a few more pest related things. Here in Manage List, you can customize that museumpests.net based identification list that pops up as you're doing your identifications. Now that list is already, it's winnowed down to reflect pests that are considered collection pests. So like will actively pose a threat to your collection, usually in terms of like consuming it. It also includes some what we call indicator pests. So like a fungus eating beetle, that could be an indication that there is excess humidity in the space. It's not a crazy long list, but it's still long enough. So if there are certain pests that you just know you're never going to see in your space, and you don't want those to pop up every time you're doing an identification, you can go ahead and uncheck those here on this list. Let's say, what do I think I'm not going to see? How about a shiny spider beetle? That's something that we don't deal with in my part of the world. So you can go ahead and uncheck that. And then whenever you pull up that list, this one will be left off of it. If you would like to create your own custom pest list entries, you can do that with the premium version of the software. So let's say there's a certain outdoor moth that's not necessarily a collection pest, but it's something that you see all the time on your inspections, and it's useful for gauging like how well sealed the building is. You can add things like that. And there's one more view of the database here under pest database, which is a little bit more in depth, so you can see the entire like fact sheet that accompanies each entry, and just scroll through it a little bit here for you. You can filter this so you can view these pests grouped in different ways, which can be really useful. So you could enter something like moth and view an entire long list of moths. You can also look at priority groupings here, which I really like. The Museum Pests group has grouped these into lists that correspond to the like Dirty Dozen, kind of most common collection pests, the Insects Limited posters, some posters from English Heritage. So let's go ahead, we can look at that. And here is that group of pests that appear on the English Heritage poster. Okay, we are pretty much done with the IPM tools. Are there any questions about that whole process, the database, anything like that? As I mentioned, you can also observe pests that are just out and about in the spaces. I can do that really quickly. Let's say we're in the Oval Office again, and we notice a beetle on the windowsill. Yikes. We can go ahead and add an image. And so there's an observation just in a space at large, as opposed to in a trap. And then I would go through and complete the identification part of the process for that. All right, if there aren't any questions about IPM, I just want to show you one more thing. If you find a bug of the other sort in the software, you can go to help up here in the settings, and this will bring up a form that you can fill out to tell us about what you're experiencing. And this will automatically create a ticket that our team will take a look at, and we'll get back to you. And we definitely want to hear from you if things seem amiss. We also want to hear from you if you have ideas. Everything in this software is related to, or it's really based on feedback that we've gotten from our users and the preservation community at large. So right here in the software is a product portal where you can submit ideas for features or upgrades that you would like to see. You can see what's planned coming down the pipeline. You can see things that are under consideration. Yay, floor maps. I can't wait for that. And you can see a list of features that have launched, again, all based on feedback from our users. And I think that's it. Are there any questions? Great, well, thank you so much for your time, everyone. Keep your eyes peeled for a follow-up email from me in the next day or so. That will include a copy, a recording of this presentation, some information about the monthly newsletter and the community, and contact info. Great. All right, thanks. All right, thanks again. Bye.